The hearing session is now open. It forms part of the examination of the Waverley Local Plan Part 2. My name is GJ Fort and I'm the inspector appointed by the Secretary of State to conduct the examination and to report to the Council in due course. The hearing will be a structured and focused discussion that I shall lead. So to begin, if I could ask Mr. Beglin to introduce the Council representatives for this morning, please.
So yes, good morning. Wayne Beglin, Council for Waverley Borough Council, and with me today, Ms. Catherine Dove and Mr. Andrew Longley.
And those joining us on Zoom, please.
Good morning, sir. Mark Barrett from the Home Builders Federation.
Thank you. So a reminder that the programme officer for the examination is Charlotte Glancy, who should be the main point of contact prior to and after the hearing sessions and should be copied into all correspondence. The hearings are being filmed and live streamed. I presume you're comfortable with that, Mr. Barrett?
I am, sir.
Thank you. So the matters to be discussed today will be focused questions based upon and taking forward the MIQs and the associated written statements received. I'm tasked with considering the soundness of the plan in accordance with the criteria of the National Planning Policy Framework and also whether it is legally compliant. The hearings are intended to assist me in this regard. In submitting the plan, the Council considers that it is a sound one and this is the starting point for the examination. So if you are challenging the soundness of the plan, you have to explain why and what changes might be necessary to make that sound. I have read and will take into account the hearing statements that have been prepared and also the original representations that were made, so there's no need for these to be substantially repeated. Instead, the aim is that the discussion moves on from those documents and deals with specific questions that I have or areas where further clarification or explanation are required. At times, I may ask for a more general contribution or a summary of your position. In order to test the plan for soundness and legal compliance, I will need to ask questions. So you will have seen I've already been doing this in written correspondence, in the MIQs and in earlier hearing sessions, and both the Council and other participants have responded to these. The questions will continue today. However, anything that is asked should not be taken as demonstrating a particular predisposition on my part. I will normally start a particular topic by asking the Council for responses to questions I have before indicating that I wish others to comment. So, Mr. Bennett, if you do wish to comment, if you could use the hands up function on the Zoom program, please. If in the course of discussion you wish to highlight certain parts of your statement or other documents that form part of the examination, then it will be helpful for me if you can provide the references. Is there any technical difficulties with Zoom? If you could contact the programme officer in the first instance. It's open to the Council to propose further changes to the plan, and I would ask that they keep a record of possible changes that arise during the course of discussion. And any changes that will constitute main modifications will be subject to future consultation. The examination remains open until my report is submitted to the Council. However, no further representations or evidence will be accepted after the hearing sessions have finished unless I specifically request otherwise. Moreover, I am not expecting any further written submissions during the course of the hearing sessions, but I may request further material should discussions indicate that that will be useful. So as ever, there'll be a short session at the end of today to ensure that any suggested modifications or additional items, such as topic papers or other evidence that I might request, have been adequately recorded. Are there any questions at this stage about the procedural aspect of the hearings?
No, sir.
Thank you. So if we can now move on to discuss matter 9. So in opening discussion on this topic, I'd like to invite the council to give a general view as to whether the plan's approach to housing mix and technical standards is justified and consistent with national policy.
So as you'll see, the draft local plan part 2 includes some draft policies, one relating to space standards and the other one about custom and self-build provision. And the council's included those policies because in terms of custom and self-build, we have a custom and self-build register that we maintain on an annual basis and demonstrates that there is a need for custom and self-build properties within Waverley. We want to support that area of house building within the borough, and it's something that's supported by government in the MPPF and MPPG. We consider that the draft policy in terms of its threshold for the requirements for custom and self-build on sites of 20 or more dwellings to be reasonable is based on evidence that the council has gathered. And we consider that the policy is sound. In terms of the space standards policy, you will have seen that the council's produced a topic paper concerning space standards, and that demonstrates that some of the properties that are built within Waverley meet the space standards, but there are others that don't meet the nationally prescribed space standards, and the council wants to include a policy about space standards to ensure that all new properties provide adequate accommodation in terms of dimensions and size and space for future occupiers. And it's for those reasons that the council has included a draft policy relating to that particular subject. The council considers that it's reasonable to do so. I think that's all I have to say on the matter.
Ms. Dove, could I just ask you to move the microphone slightly closer? I think they're quite directional, aren't they?
Sorry.
Okay. Mr. Barron?
Thank you, sir. I apologise. I've completely forgotten how to do the hand raise function on Zoom. Too many Teams meetings, I think. In terms of, just wanted to make a couple of points with regard to the council's position and our statements as well, sir. I think one of the key concerns that I had with regard to the evidence that the council was presenting was actually that there was nothing indicating actually how many homes or plots would be provided from the council's policy. Looking at their self-build register, actually it shows a very modest demand for self-build, with the self-build register indicating about 90 people on the part 2, but only an even smaller amount on the part 1. So there isn't a significant demand, and my worry was that the policy could potentially go beyond what was required, indicating from the council's evidence clearly that there is not likely to be a significant number of homes coming forward. So in that respect, the council have addressed that question. I think the other concern I have, and as set out in our statements, there is the 20-unit threshold, and really and how that relates to the 12-month marketing period. I think we are concerned that for smaller sites, a 20-year or a 20-unit threshold, you could be seeing a marketing period where you have empty plots waiting to be sold after the scheme has been built out and finished. And I think that's not a practical or an effective approach to the policy with regard to those homes. It has a negative impact on those people who have purchased homes and there will be empty plots, or it's not a practical, again, 20 units is not a practical scale at which the sort of self-build plots to come forward, in that it's difficult to separate out the self-build plots from the house building plots. It's difficult with health and safety. So our concerns, sir, around about the 20-unit threshold, but more particularly the 20-unit threshold in terms of the marketing period, and actually would suggest that a 6-month marketing period is a far more appropriate time frame, given that there is a 20-unit threshold within this policy, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Barron. So, I mean, taking Mr. Barron's points there, but also to explore, particularly on custom build a bit further. This is issue 1, isn't it? So you'll be familiar with the PPG on self-build and custom house building. So paragraph 25, that includes a range of different activities that could help to facilitate this kind of development. So is it anticipated that the policy requirement be part of that wider mix of things? So there's things like supporting neighbourhood planning groups where plans choose to include self-build, effective joint working across service delivery areas and local delivery partners, using council-owned land, and engaging with developers and landowners, encouraging them to consider custom house building. So there's sort of wider tools outside of the planning policy requirement. And is that part of the cocktail of measures? I suppose that's one of my initial points, and then any initial views you have on Mr. Barron's points as well, please.
So if I start off in response to that question, yes, the National Planning Policy Framework and the Planning Practice Guidance recognises that local authorities should be doing all they can to support customer self-build as an important part of diversifying housing delivery. And obviously that was a key part of the Letwin report as to why large sites weren't necessarily achieving their potential in terms of build rates. So the government sees customer self-build as being an important part of it, and the duties on local authorities to maintain registers of households interested in customer self-build is a key part of that, as is the requirement to maintain a supply of permissioned plots to enable that activity to take place. So the policy in the Part 2 local plan is an important part of the toolbox that the council has, and you'll be aware from discussion of sites that this policy is intended to apply across allocations, including the council's allocations. Insofar as the points that Mr. Barron has raised in relation to the thresholds, clearly Waverley as an authority is reliant on smaller sites coming forward to a greater extent than many more urban authorities, and therefore it's important to set a threshold that will realistically create opportunities on some of those development sites. And we're aware across the country that there are other authorities such as, I'll just remind myself, such as I think Malvern Hills and Mid Devon, for example, where they have a policy similar to ours. It's 5% on schemes of 20 units or over, and that, as far as I'm aware, certainly the Mid Devon one is an adopted policy. So clearly they've had the same debates, and in that case it is a 12-month marketing period to allow a realistic prospect. I accept entirely that on some sites that may create challenges in terms of the practicalities of allowing self-building to take place alongside another developer building out the rest of the site. But we think our policy does have that flexibility in terms of talking about viability and the further negotiations that can take place around that. But obviously would be prepared to look at any further modifications that build in that flexibility, because it's certainly not intended to stymie development of small sites, because clearly we need these sites to come forward. We need affordable housing in particular to come forward, and customer self-build is just a part of that mix. So in terms of is the threshold the right one, we think it is important, and we've shown in our responses to your matters, sir, that setting that threshold will provide a reasonable supply of sites to support this sector. And in terms of viability, obviously our viability report has concluded that it is sustainable to require those sorts of contributions.
Just two more points flowing from that, really, Mr. Longley. In terms of the table on page 2 of the hearing statement, I can take you to that. So that, to me, that looks like you're meeting in terms of permissions what the Part 1 registers asking for. And is there any indication that that can't continue, so that there's a need for this, you know, this particular sort of policy emphasis on it?
Yes, you're right, sir. In terms of the consents coming forward, there has been a constant, if not limited, supply of plots for customer self-build. I understand that a number of those come forward in the form of rebuilding, demolition of existing properties, rebuilding properties. So to that extent, they are very much one-off developments that aren't necessarily always meeting the needs of households who are registered, unless they happen to be the people promoting those developments. So what I'm saying is there's a sort of, it's an imperfect system in that there's a register for people to register on, and then there's a supply of sites coming forward, and they're not necessarily entirely matched up. And there's also the factor that registers themselves are imperfect in that there is a national evidence shows that there is a more of a pent-up demand than is perhaps expressed through the registers. So in answer to your question, yes, there is a supply coming forward, and Waverley has thankfully been able to meet that supply, but we want to ensure that remains the case going forward, and if possible, that opportunities are increased for households to provide customer self-build, both in the market and affordable housing sectors.
So there's the ability in the policy to take viability implications into account. But we've heard Mr. Berendt's point on deliverability of sites in general, and kind of the feasibility, the wider feasibility, that insofar as it might affect sales rates and the delivery in that way of the market element of a site. Now, I don't think those are things that will be captured in a classic sort of residual viability appraisal. So I think in terms of that is the potential for the policy to be made effective by recognizing that there might be other aspects, so the wider feasibility as well as the viability of the development, that might be relevant to a consideration of that.
So that's certainly something that we'd be happy to look at and perhaps provide some wording. Clearly, we don't want to provide a let-out clause so that builders can simply say it can't be done. But we recognise that there will be practical issues around accessing sites, and that it obviously does become easier with larger sites, and obviously Dunswell Aerodrome is one of those where there's the expectation that there will be customer self-build, and that will be far easier to provide areas of the site that can be safely developed by customer self-builders. So if we can take that away, add that to our action list to perhaps come up with some wording, we're very happy to do that.
Mr. Berendt.
Sorry, unmute. I'd agree with the need for of the word feasible to be included within the policy. I think it is about whether it's feasible on those on those sites that are relatively small, especially with the threshold that's been provided. Just one question in terms of that's just raised in terms of delivery on Dunsfold. Obviously, the council have set out how many would come forward in relation to LPP2, but obviously, if there are other sites within there, the council should really set out actually how many homes in general it expects to self-build will come forward on those existing sites, and whether actually there is the need for that given the windfall that's coming forward. So I think there is I would suggest a need to provide just for yourself, Sarah, an idea of how many homes in total they expect to come forward, not just as a result of this policy, but clearly as a result of the allocations that have been set out through LPP1 as well. So, and finally, just really, I would reiterate the need for the 6 month marketing period. Recognise that other areas do have a 12-month marketing period, but I think the 6 month marketing period, if there is the demand and the for self-build plots, should be sufficient, and then it also ensures that that schemes can be built out within a relatively reasonable time frame once those plots have been indicated that they can't be sold, and within a reasonable time frame for that development to be completed without a developer having to go away and come back on site to complete it. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Barron. So in terms of the overall yield that's anticipated, so obviously this would be from adoption of the plan and the 5% requirement, and then I suppose it's an assessment of what the outstanding requirement of relevant to the different settlements is. Is it, Mr. Longley, or is it something more complicated than that?
It may be slightly more complicated in that some of those strategic sites, including Dunsfold, already benefit from planning permission. So I'll need to seek advice on whether those include an element of custom and self-build. I know the supplementary planning document for Dunsfold Park does include an ambition for custom and self-build, but I don't think it puts a percentage on it because it was obviously done in advance of the LPP2 coming to examination. But we will no doubt be able to provide you with an update, sir, on what supply is likely to come forward from those other sites covered in LPP1.
Okay, thank you. So I've got the different respective positions on marketing periods, and I'll reflect on that. It'd be useful if I could as well see which one was it? The East Devon, Mid Devon.
Yes, Mid Devon.
Yeah,
we'll provide an extract of that.
So if we think the Malvern Hills documents take matters further as well, are you happy for those to be put into the examination library?
Yeah, if that's an adopted plan. I think Mr. Longley indicated that he wasn't sure whether that had got to adoption yet.
No, we will check whether or not that one's been tested.
Okay, anything further on the custom and self-build, Mr. Barron? Okay, if we move on to the nationally described space standards. So if we could open with Mr. Barron, you had some concerns with the imposition of the space standards in the plan and the justification for that.
Yes, sir. With regard to space standards, it's not something that the HBF is against as a rule. I think what we have some concerns is that whether the council has looked at it fully in terms of the impact, especially with regard to affordability issues. And that's a key element of the PPG, is to understand what the impact on the affordability of homes coming forward with regard to, and as we set out in our statements, sir, in terms of entry-level homes and people requiring a 4-bedroom home, but only be able to buy a 3-bedroom home at space standards in terms of size. So it's that compromise between affordability of what's needed and what's required as to what they can afford, and whether there's an impact on those sort of properties coming forward, especially in terms of an area such as Waverley, where it is one of the more expensive parts of the country. I think in terms of, though I think part of it is really with regard to flexibility and the effectiveness of the policy in that regard. And I think it is about ensuring that there will be schemes that potentially could come forward that would provide and meet the need of the community, whether it's for a specific need or in terms of affordable and a more affordable market property, a larger, more affordable market property. But it's still a well-designed home that will meet the needs of that family or that household. And I think it is whether there is a need for some degree of flexibility within the policy to reflect the fact that homes can come forward potentially below space standards, but as long as they are well designed and they are specifically meeting a need of a group within the community, sir.
So when you talk about affordable products, would these be affordable housing meeting the definition given in the framework glossary, Mr. Berendt, or simply something that's perhaps not the same price as a market house?
I think it is market housing, but it is a lower cost market housing, sir, in terms of the value. In certain sense, someone seeking to purchase within the market or even rent within that market rent, that it is that they can afford a home that potentially meets their requirements in terms of bedroom numbers, but they wouldn't be able to afford it, but they could only afford it in terms of space standards with regard to a 3-bedroom home. So there's different markets on the product, different companies produce those. So I think there is potentially markets within there that could be supported if there was a bit more flexibility within that. In addition, there will be sites that could come forward with a bit more flexibility within the policy, that certain elements of the space standards may not be met, but would allow that site to come forward again, but only on the proviso that it is well designed homes that come forward, and it's not the poorly designed low floor space, small floor space homes that are imagined to be addressed by the nationally described space standards.
Thank you. And I mean, given what you've said about those kind of exceptional types of development, is this not something that wouldn't legitimately be a matter for a planning balance at a planning application stage in terms of section 38(6), Mr. Berendt?
I think it is you could argue it is a part of that planning balance. I think it's just really providing a clear statement of intent that there is a willingness to examine those issues within the policy, rather than just purely within that planning balance. But you're right, sir, it would be part of that planning balance.
Thank you. Any responses to those points?
So you just raised exactly the point that I was going to raise to address the circumstances that Mr. Berendt was describing. But beyond that, we would submit that the policy as put forward in the submitted plan is sound. And so there's very detailed description within the council's documentation as to why that is right. And you quite rightly drawn attention to paragraph 56-020 of the PPG, Also, the three main elements of that are to look at the issue of need, look at the issue of viability, and look at the issue of timing in terms of there being a transitional period. And the council's evidence base on this issue is very well developed and does all three of those things. It demonstrates the need, it demonstrates the viability, which of course was in part tested through LPP1 as well. And a good deal of time has been given for developers to make this transition by virtue of what's summarily described as being the direction of change within our papers. So it's been foreshadowed for a number of years now. And so this is a policy that's important to ensure that in the vast majority of cases, there are some minimum standards going forward. And I think we commend it to you in its present form.
Thank you. Anything further on this point, Mr. Berend? So moving on to question 3 of issue 2. This relates to balconies and private gardens. So a main modification has been proposed in relation to this as main modification 51. So could you talk me through that main modification, please?
The main modification is really to provide some further sort of guidance and clarity to developers and other stakeholders in relation to providing private amenity space. And as we're saying, we're suggesting a sort of minimum size for private balconies, and also that sort of private gardens, if they're for use by a specific dwelling, should be at least 10 meters in depth and the width of the dwelling to ensure that there's sufficient space provided outside. And I think it's just to ensure that there is sufficient amenity space, particularly private amenity space for occupants of flats as well. And that obviously private gardens for houses can accommodate sufficient, or there's sufficient space to accommodate things that are needed for living in that home, such as space for a washing line, for example, or play equipment for children, that sort of thing.
Okay, and could you remind me of where I can find the evidence based on that? Is that in the topic paper?
I think it should be in the topic paper. Yes, sir.
Okay, moving on to question 6 on housing conversions. So again, a main modification has been proposed to this one. This is main modification 13. So that's been proposed to clarify that this relates to a net loss of dwellings. I just wondered whether the word order could be a trifle clearer. So I had 2 initial views about a potential word order that I'm sure you could improve on, but proposals for amalgamations that would result in the net loss of 5 or more dwellings will not normally be permitted, or amalgamation proposals that will result in the net loss of 5 or more dwellings will be resisted, which is, I think, more similar to the wording you've used. But in terms of that, I think, any views in terms of the clarity of that compared to the main modification that's been proposed?
Yes, I think we're happy to have a look at that wording. Thanks.
So yeah, but perfectly happy with that. But just for the benefit of my note, would you give us your second formulation again?
Yeah, amalgamation proposals that will result in a net loss of 5 or more dwellings will be resisted. Okay, so that concludes the questions I had on this matter. Mr. Behrens, have you got any more points on this matter at this point?
Nothing from me, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Behrens. So in that case, thank you all for your contributions in this session, and we'll resume at 2 o'clock. Thank you.